So I'm Stacie Goodman. I am the owner and principal consultant of Origamic Solutions. We're a small business advisory and consulting firm specializing in operations management and improvement. And we help our clients to navigate to operational excellence through small iterative changes that they can easily digest and then apply. And then we move on to the next thing so that it is not overwhelming. And I've been doing consulting for the last 25 years. I've worked for large national worldwide consulting firms down to the local ones here. So I have been across a plethora of different industries. I started out in manufacturing, moved into hospitality and support services there, have done federal, local, and state level government processes, consumer goods, and financial services. So I've kind of run from cookies to rocket ships. But now my focus is to hone in on small businesses. I was raised in small business, and so I feel the value there and want to bring the skills that I've accumulated as a process engineer, a project manager, an ops analyst, and a solution developer to the small businesses to help them. And I do have a Six Sigma certification in process engineering, just to add to the fact that I can do some of this. So what are we going to do today? We're going to do basic process fundamentals, some key tools and techniques that we use, understanding the maturity curve and how businesses work through. So you get the bells and whistles a lot of times of automation or continuous process improvement. Those are the things you see on the internet, but it does take a maturity path to get to those elements. You have to establish the foundation and the fundamentals to be able to implement those successfully. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Okay, so why is business process management important? What is it? It's important to understand what it is first. So first of all, business process management, its purpose is to establish and ensure that the processes that you're executing, they meet what you need it to do, right? They're producing the outputs at the quality level that you want to produce. They're meeting your purpose. They're meeting your strategic objectives, and they're doing that in the most efficient and effective way possible. So when we talk later through the deck, you're going to hear things about transparency and traceability, and then as well as measurements and those types of things. This is all part of business process management. Why is it important? They're the fundamentals. If you don't have processes, you have basically people and tools. That can create chaos. Processes establish structure for you so that it is repeatable, it is predictable, it is measurable. Without that, people are just doing stuff with tools, and it's like wrangling cats. It is a critical form of communication. So for small businesses, when you're going from a single person and now you need some help, and the first instinct a lot of times is, hey, I'll get a virtual assistant, right? Okay, well, you have to tell the virtual assistant what they need to do, and they need to understand what they need to do at a level of your desired outcome or your quality level. It may be not just, I need you to, capture and record this information. It helps them to understand why, right? We'll get to that later. But if you have a way of interacting with your customer, right, there's the how you want it done. And everybody has different personalities. So this starts to help that communication and facilitating the ability to delegate, because you need to be able to trust that the person will do what you want it done the way that you want it done. And then are they competent, to be able to do that? And this helps create those forms of communication. It establishes standards of expectations of performance. So not only how you do that work, but how long does it take you to do it, right? I expect if you're a cleaning service, you want the cleaning service to be done within X number of hours. And these are all the tasks that need to be done within that X number of hours. So you may have different people performing at different rates, and they need to come up to speed. There is maybe a learning curve. So you're starting to get some measurements, and you're starting to establish trust from the customer because you want a repeatable outcome that they know what they can expect. When you go to Chick-fil-A, you know they're going to say, my pleasure. When you say thank you, you're going to know that when you go to Dairy Queen, they're going to flip the blizzard upside down to show the thickness and the quality of that. These are repeated expected behaviors as a consumer that some of the brands have established. Measurable frameworks. As you mature, you're going to need to measure. You're going to need to know how much it costs and how much time does it take to execute an activity. So the processes break those tasks down into measurable units, and then enable growth. So if you want to grow, and let's say you're a nonprofit and you have this great service that you're providing, but you want to be able to license that. Business processes and operations manuals, things of that nature, those create frameworks and playbooks that you can then, lease, sell, or you can replicate in other markets so that you can continue to grow your company, present the same expectations in a repeatable, trusted manner. So that's where, like with McDonald's, when the man, not the McDonald's, but the other guy, I can't think of his name right now, but when he established the franchising rules, if you did not follow the rules, yes?
Ray Kroc.
Thank you, Ray Kroc. I got to watch the movie again, but if you didn't follow the franchising rules, he would take the franchise back, because it was that important to have that repeatable trust and understanding of what that experience was going to be like. So they help with that. And then they help you ensure that you're continuing to align to your purpose and your culture. So aligning to your purposes, I want to be able to educate, small businesses. Is everything that all the processes I'm doing, is that helping to enable that education, meet that purpose? And then their culture is, I want to do it in a very approachable and interactive way. So are my processes fulfilling that? I want my team to be interactive, and I want them to feel empowered. Are my processes enabling that? If I have a lot of approval processes, and that takes away from that value of empowerment, right? So those are how this stuff aligns to ensuring that you keep your culture, your purpose, and your focus going forward. Okay, so one of the main questions I get from a lot of smaller businesses, especially nonprofits, is, I got a policies and procedures manual. What's the difference between that and operations? I'm like, well, let's figure out what's policies, procedures, and processes actually are, and why they are used interchangeably, but they're very different. So policies establish guidelines and rules. We're going to do A, B, or C, right? That's the policy that my company stands by. So it tries to mitigate risk. So you might have a policy because you have a regulatory requirement. You might have health, like a HIPAA, requirement from the health, or you might have something from the state government or federal government. You may need to minimize risk. So how people interact with your customers, right? Sometimes especially like in mental health, there's a lot of personal engagement with that person, with your customer, but you have to draw lines and boundaries. You can't extend that, to, outside of the business, room or something of that nature. And then there are compliances that you have to do just for tax purposes. I need to do my finance processes a certain way because I have to fulfill that. So those are general, they're broad statements and they're guidelines. Processes focus on the task and the people and the sequence. So they are higher level, usually given in a pictorial realm. We call them a flow diagram. We're going to show those in a little bit. But they focus on, they're a series of at least three activities and or a question. So otherwise it's just a checklist. So you identify who does what, when, and where. That it's not about the how. It's just about who, what, when, and where. And also you want to make sure that when you have what's called an integrated or connected diagram, that's one process to another process. I'm going to make dinner. So I may have a process for setting the table and a process for cooking the food and a process for buying the food. Those will all integrate together into one process that says how to cook dinner, how to prepare Sunday dinner. What that allows you to see is dependencies. I need to buy the food, then I need to cook the food, I need to set the table, then I can consume the food, right? So that traceability and transparency will help people understand, if you're divvying out responsibilities, what is their impact on the next person or the next process. And so a lot of times you'll see businesses create processes inside their own departments, but the departments don't understand what the other departments in the business are doing. And so it's important to have that transparency. And then procedures, those are the hows. That's your standard operating procedure. That is your work instruction. That is your training manual. It is down to the nitty gritty of, if I picked it up, I should be able to execute that activity or that task by because it gives me enough specifics in the how. Click here, write this there, pick that up, move it to, point B. It will help to ensure that you have quality and efficiencies and controls established. So if you want a good quality program or business, you have to make sure you implement quality and control steps at the bottom layer. You can't just let it bubble up and hope for the best. So the procedures create that piece of communication to ensure it's done the same way every time. Now, there's lots of different ways of doing procedure documentation. We'll talk about some of those here in a minute. So we'll take a breath and we'll go to the next one. All right. So here, this is an example that I was just describing. It may be a small eye chart, but it's more understanding the visual differences. So the policy is that my family will eat dinner together with a home cooked meal on Sundays, right? That's our policy, if it is or not, but that's what we're putting on the paper. So the question, how do I prepare? The process is preparing Sunday dinner. And as you can see, processes, and this is an eye chart, but it talks about, okay, it's Sunday, and now my family members need to check the dinner chore assignments. So everybody's got chores. You got to go check your assignments, see what you're supposed to do. And so whoever's assigned the buy the ingredients has to check in the cupboards and make sure we have or find what they need. And then the other person who's assigned to set the table, they have to go and start preparing the individual plates and making sure there's clean everything, So we have this process flow that works all the way down to we eat our dinner. That's here. And then there's the cleanup process, right? So the cleanup process starts of everybody's got to clean the table off. Some people are given the task to put the food away and throw away the trash, where the others have to wash the dishes. So the diagram starts to show you connections where these run in parallel, these sub-processes of setting the table and getting the dinner. Then they come together to eat, and then they split again. And these are, you can go horizontally or vertically. I put these in here on purpose so you can see, but generally it runs top to bottom, left to right, just like you read a book, if possible. Now, sometimes they get a little squirrely just because we got to fit them on a piece of paper the right way, but in general, that's how it flows. The procedure starts to, this is for one of the boxes, which is set the dinner table. So as you can see, the level of detail is different. It says you need to lay out the placemat. You need to put the dinner plate in the middle of the placemat. You need to lay the napkin to the left, to the right. It may even give a diagram, just to make sure that it's clear. And so you can choose to do that. You can do it as a video. A lot of us, we learn from YouTube now, right? On how to do some of those things. So you can use a video as your, for your procedures. But that's the difference. It's a broad statement as a policy. The flow diagram gives you a general idea of the what's and in the sequence, and then the procedures give you the deeper detail. So processes, like I said, processes are about inputs going through a machine and producing the desired output. The machine is the process itself. The inputs are whatever the materials or information you need in order to execute the process. The processes, as I said, are generally 3 or more actions. Otherwise, it's a task or a single isolated decision, which you rarely have. They usually have some level of interconnectivity. And the whole purpose is to convert the inputs into the desired outputs. Now, that task may be there's a customer-supplier relationship as you go through the task when you're dealing with multiple people. Even if it's in the same company, you still have to treat that as if the receiver is your external client. You want to maintain the level of quality. You want to make sure that it's a clear output that is consumable to them. So remembering that is important as you're thinking through your processes. Again, the key components of a process are the who, what, when, and where. Procedures handle the how. What is a healthy process? Like, how do I know I have a good one? What do you look like at Stacie when you come in and evaluate my processes? I'm going to look for, are they transparent? Meaning, are they documented? Are they communicated through videos of some sort where somebody can look at them more than once? It's not just a one-time verbal transfer of knowledge. Are they repeatable? No matter who does it, if it's Kristen, Tiffany, or myself, we're all going to do it the same way. And we're going to present the same output every time. That requires some extra quality control, checks. So if you fold a napkin and I fold it left to right and Tiffany folds it from the bottom to the top, if it's not a square napkin, it's going to look weird and it may have the seams looking differently. You want to make sure that it's to that level of detail or repeatability. Is it executed consistently? So again, sometimes you'll have people in your organization that have been there for a while and they've gotten comfortable and they may decide to do it a different way, their own way. And that we don't necessarily want. We want that compliance, because if they do it their own way, now we have an offshoot or variant of that process, and it may or may not yield what we need. We also may not know it's happening. I go into a lot of companies and find variants of, well, Susie's doing it this way and Bob's doing it that way. Which way do you want it, done? Because that makes it difficult to measure. It also depends on who if Susie's training somebody or if Bob's training somebody, they may train them differently. Traceability. So when I go in later on in the maturity curve, we start looking for efficiencies, right? Through lean analysis. And that's looking for waste. It's looking, are the activities that are happening value added? Are they traceable back to my objectives? Are they adding value, or are they just wasting time? Sometimes you can lean something out because you can make it more automated, but it still has to be feeding. It's got to be for a purpose. And if it's not, it's considered non-value added. And so then we would want to remove that activity. As companies grow, you hear, well, we've always done it that way. Okay, but maybe that's not the best way now, because now there are new players involved that have different skill sets, and I don't have to be as detailed, or maybe I need to automate something. So making sure that it's traceable of why you're doing it, because this output aligns to this objective or to this purpose, is important to make sure you're not wasting time and money and resources. And then, is it measurable? A task should be time bound, right? I can do it and I can measure from task to task. A process, you have to look at the accumulation of the time it takes to do all the tasks, and where do you have to wait because you have a dependency, right? So I need to understand how long does it should it take me to execute this process, or how much resources and how much cost does it take. So if you look at a task and it takes two people to do the task and they make $10 an hour, and it takes 2 hours to do it, okay, that's $20, per hour to do it, because it's two people at $10 an hour times 2 hours. It's a $40 task. So we can get down into those measurements where we can break it down and figure out how much money and how much time does it take. Particularly when you're dealing with products, it's important. Services get a little fuzzier because a lot of times they have a lot of more contributing variables, but it's still something that you can estimate. And with consulting, we do what's called activity-based consulting. So we do a process of what we think we're going to have to do, and then we break it down to figure out how much it's going to cost, and we know how much to charge our client, right? Services tend to have to go through that as well. Processes can be executed in 3 different ways: manual, what we call semi-automated, which means it takes a human and a computer to do it, right? And then fully automated, which means the computer can do it on its own, or the machinery can do it on its own. It doesn't need a human interaction. But it's important. A lot of people want to go to semi-automated or fully automated, and QuickBooks is a great example, right? You do QuickBooks, you put in your expenses and you code them to your account. After 2 or 3 times, it's like, hey, let me give you a rule. Don't you want a rule? It'll make it so much easier. And people go, yes, that sounds great. I'll click that button. Then they forget, or it doesn't apply the same knowledge set. Like a new transaction comes in, you don't really want it to go over here because I may have coded it wrong in the beginning. Now I've got 40 transactions I have to reverse at the end of the year. And I say this because I have had to do this for clients, and and even for myself, I've had to turn rules off. So it's important you understand the manual task itself, all the components and the decision-making criteria before you start to automate pieces. Now, semi-automation, I don't include Word, Microsoft Office suite, basically, the basics, Word, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint. Those are still considered manual to me, at least until AI starts to take over more. But anything outside of that, if you're using an off-the-shelf system or a web-based system, then that would be considered semi-automated if you're looking at what's the difference in Stacie's viewpoint. So and then the last, again, is ensuring we talked about this, but ensuring you have traceability back to why are you doing what you're doing. That's about it. An auditor will ask you why are you doing that. So I've talked about the components, and then I've talked about maturity and how those things change over time. So there are a lot of maturity curves that are maturity matrices that are out on the internet. This is one with process that I've adopted to help evaluate. When I go look at a company, I look at a number of factors and try to figure out where they are on those maturity curves, and each one is a little bit different. For processes, if you may have had your company for 10, 15 years, but it's just been you or you and a couple other people, and you really haven't had to document it because you can talk to them and you've worked with them for a long time. So from a maturity curve in process, you would be considered kind of in that initial stage. I got some random ad hoc things written down, or maybe I don't, right? And I hear a lot of people use it's custom built, custom design, but nothing's really, the processes are not custom. It's the variables associated to the process that, colors, style. You still build a car with an engine, a transmission, 4 wheels, and a framework and some seats, usually. At minimum, that's a car. Now, the design of the car may be a little bit different, but the basic construction is the same. And that's the same for processes. Once you decide you're going to start writing down things, what we find is that will be done in a more of a departmental basis. So I may have a lot written down for my finance, or my finance department's done that, or my marketing department, whatever my strength is. I tend to see the documentation in this area of strength, not of weakness for the company. If they're a little more weaker, then they won't have it as documented. We call this you're in the repeatable or siloed stage, because they're different levels of completion, but they don't integrate. They don't show how, when my part comes out, it triggers this next process to start. So if I come in with sales and I complete a sale, it doesn't show that I'm now going to go to the internal back office, customer service and production processes. It just has sales processes. When it connects, that's when you move into your define stage. So now you have rules, and you may be starting to get some measurements, but essentially you have the rules and expectations, and top to bottom how that flows. So from the time it's Sunday and I got to go buy ingredients for dinner, all the way down to I've cleaned up and I've finished for the night. You can see that whole process. When you get to measured, now you're starting to build measurements. You know how much lead time you need. They're called cycle times, for how much time it takes to activate it or execute it. You have rules, things are consistent. You're now looking at dashboards. You're looking at data to see, what do I want to do? Have I hit my KPIs? Am I hitting my OKRs? All kinds of different measurements that you have, to see where can I grow? Where do I need to improve? You're starting to lean things out. How do I reduce cost? How do I reduce variability? How do I improve effectivity? How do I improve quality? So you're making all these refinements. That's in the manage stage. And then the difference between optimizing and managing is optimizing has embedded into its culture continuous improvement. So you can be very young company, and you can start building and go through this maturity curve quickly if you start thinking that way when you're building your processes, and within a couple of years you can still be in that optimizing stage. There's not an expansion or a number of years it takes to go through that maturity, but it's kind of like a toddler. We were talking about it earlier. A toddler learns to crawl, then they stand, then they slowly walk holding on to things, then they start to run. But it's that if those of us who have children, that stage from standing to running is really short. I mean, they kind of get it quick. A few falls on the head, they're off and gone. Now you're starting to chase a 2-year-old. The difference between a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old and a mama and daddy having to run around after it. It's the same thing with a business. It can pick up speed quickly.
Stacie, I just want to give you a heads up on time. We have 5 minutes left of instruction before we open it to questions.
Okay. So we may not get through some of the other stuff. What can you do now, right? So we've talked about the phases. These are activities you can do within each phase as you grow, and they build on each other. So if you're just getting started, you can create an activity list. These are all the things I need to do, kind of like to execute whatever the process is, a checklist. And then you can start from there, you can start to say who's responsible for it. Now, it may be all you to start out with, But if you look at roles, so I do all the finance, but eventually a finance person, as I grow, would take over that. So you start shifting the roles. So look at it as roles versus names if you can. If you don't have roles established in your business, that's something you probably want to do, but you can start with, use your people's names until you get there. Then once you've got that list of inventory, then start documenting your procedures of how to do things, because you want to be able to establish ways of communication that we talked about earlier, specific enough to bring on a new person to delegate an activity out. After you get those processes, then you can start to design the flow diagrams, right? Because that's just going to help you later, but it's not something you have to do right away. You just work through your maturity curve. And then you start adding those measurements, looking for wait times, resource requirements, cost, etc. And then you put in your improvement. So if you start at one, it will build and give and serve as an input to the next one. This is an example of what we call a RACI. So RACIs help you define who's accountable. The buck stops here, right? Who's responsible, the person you executes or delegates to. Who's a helper, who you consult, you just talk to them, right? They don't have really responsibilities, but you do talk to them. And then who you inform, that's an outbound, just a one-way communication. So this is just like a board member, executive director, president. You can have accountability and responsibility. That's common. And you may have an informed and a support, mechanism. A board is a broad unit or, of people. Some people may support, some people may just be informed. So this is one way to decide who does what. So you have your task list, your inventory, your checklist, and then you start putting your people to it. This is what's called a SIPOC. So we use it to kind of just start helping brainstorm the processes. So you put your processes, steps, what do you need in order to do it? That's your input. Who do you get that from? That's your supplier. So your supplier provides your inputs that you need to execute your process. The process, once executed, produces outputs, and you define what those are. And then who gets your outputs is your customer. That takes you end to end at a higher level conceptually. And this is an example of one, just for making the dinner, right? You need all the assigned family members. They have a chore chart, they have ingredients, they have working appliances, they have a list of things they need for the table. Then they have all their cleaning supplies and trash bags, etc. This is the process in which they go through to prepare and execute dinner. These are my expectations. I have 4 place settings, glasses, dinners prepared for each person. The dirty dishes are cleaned up, leftovers are put away, trash is disposed of, and the kitchen's clean. And the customers are the people who live in the house or consuming that dinner. So it's a simple, yeah.
We have like a minute left, so
Okay.
may I make a recommendation? Because I know you got a few slides. Can you definitely hit slide 16?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just run very quickly through this is when you go back and read this again. It's just a diagram of the process flow. You've seen them before. It explains the different symbols that you can use. So that's something that's pretty standard. You may see different variations. So this is a simple flow diagram. This one is cross-functional, meaning they're called swim lanes. They talk about each of the departments or each of the people. So they show it just is how they break up the steps of the who's. I'm on 16, I'm 15. So there are various ways of doing training videos. You can use, if you're a Microsoft user, you can use PowerPoint, where you can actually show yourself talking and do the slide and talk over it. Stream is kind of like doing a Zoom call. Loom is a free web service that you can use. It basically does the same thing. And then sometimes we do videos, like you have Instagram. People are just doing it on their iPads, you know, or their tablets and phones, and they can use the record feature, the camera video feature, and then they use iMovie a lot to edit that. So that's one way. If you don't have time to document, you can do knowledge transfer via video. And then I think I'm on 16, which is the final slide. So why is this all important? You gain a lot of benefits through efficiencies and productivity, meaning you can do more and with less money or less resources. It can decrease the cost as you improve the efficiencies and the awareness of the cost, improve your quality, compliance, reduce your risk. You can get a competitive advantage. A lot of times you'll see it's not the newest product, the concept of a product or service is not new, but how they execute it is different. And then employee satisfaction. If they're engaged in the continuous improvement, they feel bought in, and so you can improve that. But you have to have, in order to get these benefits, you have to have the solid foundation. So remember the maturity curve. You start with you lay your foundation and then continue to refine and improve. So the summary is, I'm just going to click through these quickly. Look for alignment, transparency, make sure you're using it to communicate, give you a framework. We talked about policies and guidelines or rules. Processes are who, what, when, where. Procedures are the detailed hows. And then again, crawl, walk, run. Take your time moving through the maturity curve. Utilize techniques that work for you. There's a lot of different options out there. A SIPOC may not work for you, and that's okay. And then think ahead of establishing the culture of continuous improvement. It's never perfect. It's always a living, breathing organism, so you can always find opportunities. And thank you. That's all I have today. Now I'm open for questions.
Yeah.